In the heart of Transylvania, nestled within the fortified walls of the town of Sighisoara, a child was born around the year 1431. This was no ordinary child. This was Vlad III, a prince of Wallachia, a land that lay just south of the Carpathian Mountains. His father was Vlad II, a powerful nobleman who had recently been inducted into a special Christian military order. This group, the Order of the Dragon, was created to defend the Christian lands of Europe against the ever-expanding Ottoman Empire. Because of his membership, Vlad II earned the name Dracula, which meant the dragon. Consequently, his young son, Vlad III, would become known as Dracula, or the son of the dragon. This name, in time, would echo through history with a chilling resonance, far removed from its noble origins. The world into which young Vlad was born was one of constant conflict and shifting loyalties. The Kingdom of Hungary to the north and the Ottoman Empire to the south were two colossal powers, and the smaller principalities, like Wallachia, were caught precariously in between. A ruler had to be a cunning diplomat, a fierce warrior, and at times a ruthless strategist to survive. Vlad's father, Dracula, understood this delicate balance all too well. He spent his life navigating the treacherous political landscape, making promises to the Hungarian king one day and negotiating with the Ottoman Sultan the next. This constant dance of diplomacy was the only way to keep his small domain from being swallowed whole by its powerful neighbours. Young Vlad's early years were spent learning the ways of a prince and a warrior. He was trained in horsemanship, swordsmanship, and the complex art of statecraft. He watched his father deal with powerful boyars, the wealthy landowners of Wallachia who held considerable influence and were often a source of internal strife. These nobles could be fiercely loyal, but they could also be dangerously treacherous, plotting to overthrow a ruler they deemed weak or unfavourable to their own interests. The lessons Vlad learned were not just from tutors and trainers, but from observing the brutal reality of power in a land where a single misstep could lead to ruin, and betrayal often lurked behind a smiling face. The very name of his family, tied to the Order of the Dragon, symbolized a sacred duty. The dragon was a creature of immense power, but it was also a symbol of the devil in Christian law. The Order's purpose was to crush this symbolic evil, represented by the enemies of their faith. This duality of a name meaning both dragon and something more sinister seemed to foreshadow the life of the young prince. He was born into a legacy of holy war, political intrigue, and the constant looming threat of violence. It was a harsh environment, a crucible that would forge the boy into the man who would one day make the world tremble at the mention of his name. The delicate political balancing act performed by Vlad's father, Vlad Dracula, eventually faltered. In 1442, the Ottoman Sultan Murad II summoned him to his court. Suspecting a trap, but having little choice, Dracula went, bringing his two younger sons with him. The young Vlad, then about 11 years old, and his even younger brother, Radu. The Sultan's suspicions of Dracula's loyalty to the Hungarian cause were confirmed, and the Wallachian ruler was imprisoned. To ensure his future cooperation, the Sultan decided to keep the two boys as political hostages. They were not thrown into a dungeon, however. Instead, they were raised within the opulent yet dangerous confines of the Ottoman court, a gilded cage where they were both guests and prisoners. For young Vlad, these years were a profound and transformative experience. He and his brother Radu were educated alongside the Sultan's own sons, including the future Mehmed II, who would later be known as the conqueror. They learned the Turkish language, studied the Quran, and were trained in the arts of Ottoman warfare and administration. While his brother Radu seemed to adapt well, even thriving in this environment and forming a close bond with Mehmed, Vlad was different. He was reportedly defiant, proud, and resentful of his captivity. He witnessed firsthand the absolute power of the Sultan, a power built on unwavering authority and swift, often brutal punishment for disobedience. The psychological impact of this period on Vlad cannot be overstated. He saw how the Ottomans commanded loyalty and maintained order within their vast empire. Their methods were direct and unforgiving. He learned that hesitation was seen as weakness and that mercy was a luxury rarely afforded. While living in the heart of his family's greatest enemy, he developed a deep-seated hatred for the Ottomans, but also a grudging respect for their strength and their methods of control. The very system that held him captive was also his classroom, teaching him lessons in ruthlessness that he would one day apply with terrifying efficiency in his own kingdom. During this time, Vlad was also exposed to a particularly gruesome form of Ottoman punishment, impalement. This horrific method of execution was designed not just to kill, but to create a spectacle of terror, a slow and agonizing death that served as a powerful warning to any who might consider rebellion or defiance. The sight of men and women left to die on sharpened stakes was a calculated tool of psychological warfare. For the young prince, these images were seared into his memory. He was learning in the most visceral way possible how fear could be used as an instrument of power, a lesson that would become the cornerstone of his future reign. While Vlad and Radu were held hostage by the Ottomans, the political situation back in Wallachia was spiraling into chaos. Their father, Vlad Dracula, had been released by the Sultan on the condition that he would remain a loyal vassal and pay an annual tribute. However, the powerful Kingdom of Hungary, led by the regent John Hunyadi, saw Dracula's allegiance with the Ottomans as a betrayal. Hunyadi was a sworn enemy of the Turks and a dominant figure in the region's politics. He decided that Wallachia needed a new ruler, one who would be firmly aligned with the Hungarian cause against the Ottoman threat. This decision set in motion a tragic and bloody chain of events. In 1447, Hunyadi led a military campaign into Wallachia to depose Vlad Dracula. He did not act alone. He found willing allies among the Wallachian boyars, the powerful nobles who had grown dissatisfied with Dracula's rule and his attempts to balance the demands of both Hungary and the Ottoman Empire. These boyars, seeing an opportunity to increase their own power and align themselves with the formidable Hunyadi, turned against their own prince. The betrayal was swift and brutal. Vlad Dracula was captured by the rebellious nobles not far from Bucharest and was mercilessly executed in the marshes near the village of Balteni. The assassins' cruelty did not end with the father. Their next target was Vlad's older brother and heir, Mircea II. Mircea had been ruling in his father's stead and had fought bravely against the invading forces. However, he too was betrayed by the boyars of the city of Târgoviște. According to the chronicles of the time, he was captured, blinded with a red-hot iron poker, and then buried alive. This horrific act was a clear message to any who remained loyal to Dracula's family. The boyars, with Hunyadi's backing, had seized control and installed their own puppet ruler, a man named Vladislav II. News of the brutal murders of his father and older brother eventually reached Vlad in the Ottoman Empire, The immense grief and rage he must have felt is hard to imagine. He had lost his family not just to a foreign invader, but to the treachery of his own people, the very nobles who were supposed to be the pillars of the kingdom. This profound betrayal shaped his view of the world, and in particular, his view of the boyar class. He came to see them as a nest of vipers, untrustworthy and self-serving, who would sacrifice their country for personal gain. This deep-seated distrust would fuel a burning desire for vengeance, a desire that would later be unleashed upon Wallachia with terrifying force. The political landscape of Wallachia was as unstable as a ship in a storm. Following the brutal assassination of Vlad's father and brother, John Hunyadi had installed his own candidate, Vladislav II, on the throne. However, Hunyadi soon became preoccupied. He decided to launch a massive crusade against the Ottoman Empire, marching his army deep into the Balkans. This created a power vacuum in Wallachia. The Sultan, seeing an opportunity to counter Hungary's influence and install a ruler more favourable to his own interests, decided to act. His chosen instrument was the young Vlad, the hostage who had grown into a man burning with a desire for revenge. In the autumn of 1448, with the backing of a contingent of Ottoman troops, Vlad crossed the Danube River into Wallachia. Vladislav II, the man who sat on the throne that Vlad considered rightfully his, was away fighting alongside Hunyadi in the Balkans. With the throne temporarily undefended, Vlad seized his chance. He marched into the capital city of Târgoviște and declared himself the new voivode, or ruler of Wallachia. For the first time, the son of the dragon held the power he believed was his birthright. His first reign, however, was destined to be incredibly short-lived. This initial taste of authority lasted for a mere 2 months. The crusade, led by John Hunyadi, ended in a disastrous defeat for the Christian forces at the Second Battle of Kosovo. Hunyadi managed to escape the carnage and began his retreat back towards Hungary. Upon learning that his chosen ruler, Vladislav II, had been deposed, he diverted his forces. Vladislav II returned to Wallachia, now backed by the remnants of Hunyadi's formidable army. Vlad, with only a small force of Ottoman support, stood little chance against the returning prince and his powerful Hungarian ally. He was forced to abandon the throne and flee. This brief, fleeting period of rule was a critical learning experience for Vlad. He had succeeded in taking power, but he had failed to hold it. He realized that relying solely on foreign support was not enough. To truly secure his throne, he would need to build his own power base within Wallachia, a base strong enough to withstand both internal and external threats. He went into exile, spending the next several years in the neighbouring principalities of Moldavia and Transylvania, biding his time, forging new alliances and plotting his return. The brief sting of defeat only hardened his resolve. He would be back, and next time he would not be so easily removed. For 8 long years, Vlad wandered in exile, a prince without a kingdom. He observed, he learned, and he waited. His moment finally came in 1456. The political winds had shifted once again. The great Ottoman Sultan, Mehmed II, who had conquered the legendary city of Constantinople just 3 years prior, was now preparing to invade the Kingdom of Hungary. John Hunyadi, needing to secure his southern border, decided that a fierce and anti-Ottoman ruler in Wallachia would be a valuable asset. He put aside his old allegiances and gave his support to Vlad. With Hungarian backing, Vlad invaded Wallachia, confronted his rival Vladislav II, and killed him in single combat, finally reclaiming his father's throne. This time, Vlad was determined to hold on to power, and his methods were unlike anything Wallachia had seen before. His primary goal was to centralize all authority in his own hands and break the power of the treacherous boyar nobles who had murdered his family and dominated the country's politics for decades. He believed that the nation's weakness stemmed from their constant infighting and disloyalty. To establish absolute order, he turned to absolute terror. He began a systematic purge of those he deemed disloyal or corrupt. And well, his preferred method of execution was the one he had learned to dread in his youth impalement. One of the most famous and chilling stories of his reign illustrates his methods perfectly. Shortly after taking the throne, Vlad invited hundreds of boyars and their families to a grand Easter feast. During the feast, he confronted them, asking them how many different princes they had served in their lifetimes. When their answers revealed their long history of shifting loyalties, Vlad's soldiers surrounded them. According to the legends, the older boyars were immediately taken outside and impaled on sharpened stakes. The younger, healthier ones were marched 50 miles to the ruins of a remote castle and forced to rebuild it with their bare hands, a task that many did not survive. This brutal act sent a shockwave through the country. Vlad was not just punishing his enemies, he was making a statement. He applied this same ruthless logic to all levels of society. He impaled corrupt officials, lazy workers, and common thieves, often for minor offences. His goal was to create a state where law and order were absolute, and the fear of his terrible justice was the ultimate deterrent. Foreign merchants who cheated Wallachians were impaled alongside their local counterparts. In a very short time, Vlad had transformed Wallachia. It was a land of stark, terrifying order, where the slightest transgression could lead to a slow and agonizing death on a stake. He was no longer just Dracula. He was now Chepesh, the Impaler. Having consolidated his power within Wallachia through sheer terror, Vlad turned his attention to foreign policy. For several years, he continued the tradition of paying tribute to the Ottoman Sultan, a practice that, acknowledged his status as a vassal. However, this was merely a ploy to buy time while he strengthened his army and fortified his lands. By the year 1459, he felt strong enough to defy the empire that had once held him captive. When Ottoman envoys arrived in Târgoviște to collect the overdue tribute, as well as a levy of 500 boys for the Janissary Corps, Vlad refused. In a legendary act of defiance, he is said to have had the envoys' turbans nailed to their heads because they refused to remove them in his presence, citing religious custom. This open act of rebellion was a declaration of war. In the winter of 1461 to 1462, Vlad launched a surprise campaign south of the Danube River, deep into Ottoman territory. His small army stormed through the region, burning villages and slaughtering tens of thousands of Turkish and Bulgarian inhabitants. He sent letters to the King of Hungary, boasting of his kills and, quite grimly, sending sacks filled with the noses and ears of his victims as proof of his success. He was deliberately provoking the Sultan, Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople, goading the most powerful ruler in the world into a direct confrontation. In the spring of 1462, Sultan Mehmed II responded as Vlad knew he would. He assembled a colossal army, said to be over 3 times the size of Vlad's forces, and marched personally to crush the insolent Wallachian prince. Vlad, vastly outnumbered, could not hope to win a conventional battle. Instead, he adopted a scorched earth policy, burning his own villages and poisoning wells to deny the advancing Ottoman army any food or water. He waged a relentless guerrilla war, launching surprise night attacks and ambushes that harassed and demoralized the much larger force. One famous raid saw Vlad and a few of his men disguise themselves as Turks, infiltrate the Sultan's camp, and attempt to assassinate Mehmed himself in his tent. The climax of this campaign of psychological warfare came as the Sultan's army approached Vlad's capital, Târgoviște. There, on the plains outside the city, Mehmed and his soldiers were confronted with a sight of unimaginable horror. Stretching for several kilometers was a grotesque landscape that would become known as the Forest of the Impaled. Vlad had used some 20,000 captured Ottoman soldiers and Bulgarian sympathizers to create this terrifying spectacle. Men, women and children were impaled on a forest of sharpened stakes, left to die in agony. The sight was so ghastly, so profoundly shocking, that even the battle-hardened Sultan, a man who had conquered the greatest city on earth, was said to have been sickened and turned back, his will to fight momentarily broken. Although the Forest of the Impaled was a masterful act of psychological warfare that temporarily halted the Ottoman advance, it could not win the war for Vlad. Sultan Mehmed II, though shaken, was not defeated. He simply changed his strategy. Instead of conquering Wallachia through force alone, he decided to replace its defiant ruler. His candidate for the throne was none other than Vlad's own younger brother, Radu, who had grown up at the Ottoman court and remained loyal to the Sultan. With the promise of peace and the backing of a portion of the Ottoman army, Radu presented himself as a more palatable alternative to the terrifying reign of his brother. Many of Wallachia's boyars, who lived in constant fear of Vlad's purges, saw Radu's arrival as their salvation. They quickly abandoned the impaler and flocked to his brother's side. Betrayed once again by his own nobles, Vlad's support crumbled. His army dwindled, and he was forced to flee north into Transylvania, seeking aid from his supposed ally, the King of Hungary, Matthias Corvinus, the son of John Hunyadi. Vlad expected to be welcomed as a hero, a champion of Christendom who had bravely fought against the Ottoman tide. He carried letters detailing his victories and his pleas for reinforcements to continue the fight. However, a hero's welcome was not what awaited him. King Matthias Corvinus had his own complex political agenda. He had received financial support from the Pope for a crusade against the Ottomans, but he had used the money for other purposes and had no intention of starting a major war. Vlad's presence was now a political embarrassment. To justify his inaction to the Pope and other European leaders, Matthias had Vlad arrested. Forged letters were produced, allegedly showing that Vlad was secretly plotting with the Ottoman Sultan to attack Hungary. On these trumped-up charges of treason, Vlad the Impaler was thrown into prison. The fierce warrior who had defied a sultan found himself a captive once more. This was not a gilded cage like his youth in the Ottoman Empire. This was a true imprisonment. For around 12 long years, from approximately 1463 to 1475, Vlad remained a prisoner in Hungary, first in Buda and later in Visegrad. The ruler who had imposed his will on an entire nation with such brutal finality was now powerless, a pawn in the games of a foreign king. His reign of terror was over, and his name began to fade into a dark legend, a cautionary tale whispered in the courts of Europe. Years passed, and Vlad languished in his Hungarian prison. The political climate of Eastern Europe, however, was in constant flux. In Wallachia, his brother Radu the Handsome ruled as an Ottoman puppet, but his reign was short. After Radu's death, a succession of other Ottoman-backed princes came and went, keeping the region unstable. Meanwhile, the threat from the Ottoman Empire had not disappeared. It had only grown. Stephen III of Moldavia, another powerful ruler and Vlad's own cousin, was now waging a desperate war against the Turks. He began pressuring the Hungarian king, Matthias Corvinus, to release Vlad, arguing that the Impaler was the only man with the skill and ferocity to effectively fight the Ottomans. Eventually, King Matthias Corvinus relented. His reasons were practical. He needed a strong anti-Ottoman commander on his southern border, and Vlad, despite his long imprisonment, was still the most formidable candidate. There was, however, a significant condition for his release. To fully integrate into the Hungarian political sphere and solidify his new alliance, Vlad was required to abandon his Eastern Orthodox faith and convert to Roman Catholicism. For a man whose father had been in the Order of the Dragon, a defender of Orthodox Christianity, this was a major concession. But after more than a decade in captivity, it was a price he was willing to pay for his freedom and a chance to reclaim his throne. Once released, Vlad did not immediately return to Wallachia. He was integrated into the Hungarian nobility. King Matthias even arranged for him to marry a member of the Hungarian royal family, possibly a cousin of the king himself. For a time, Vlad lived as a Hungarian captain, commanding forces in the ongoing border wars against Ottoman incursions. He proved that his years in prison had not dulled his military instincts. He remained a brilliant and ruthless commander, earning the respect of the Hungarian soldiers and reminding his allies, and well his enemies, of the fearsome warrior he had once been. This period marked a significant transformation for Vlad. He was no longer the lone, defiant prince of a small land. He was now part of a larger Christian alliance, formally bound to the Kingdom of Hungary and its Catholic king. His conversion and marriage cemented this new identity. His singular goal remained the same, to fight the Ottomans and reclaim his homeland. But now he would do so not as an independent ruler, but as a key player in a broader coalition. The stage was being set for his third and final attempt to rule Wallachia. The Impaler was about to return. In 1476, the opportunity Vlad had been waiting for finally arrived. With a combined force of Hungarian and Moldavian troops, and with the blessing of King Matthias Corvinus, he marched into Wallachia for the third time. The ruling prince, an Ottoman appointee named Basarab Lajota, fled in the face of Vlad's advance, and the Impaler took his seat on the throne in Targoviste once again. After nearly 3 decades of struggle, betrayal, exile and imprisonment, he was finally the undisputed voivode of Wallachia. He immediately began preparing for the inevitable Ottoman counterattack, knowing the Sultan would not allow him to rule for long. His third reign, however, was tragically brief, lasting little more than 2 months. As soon as Vlad took power, his Hungarian allies and the main Moldavian force withdrew, considering their mission accomplished. They left him with only a small personal guard of fewer than 4,000 men. The Ottoman Empire, as expected, responded swiftly. A large Turkish army marched into Wallachia to restore their chosen ruler, Basarab Lajota. Vlad, once again vastly outnumbered, was forced to meet this overwhelming force in open battle. The final confrontation took place in December 1476, in a forested, swampy area near Bucharest. The exact details of Vlad's death are shrouded in the mists of history and conflicting accounts. Some stories claim he was ambushed and killed by the Turks. Others, more tragically, suggest he was betrayed and assassinated by disloyal Wallachian boyars who had sided with the Ottomans. One legend even holds that he was accidentally killed by one of his own men who mistook him for a Turk in the heat of battle. Whatever the circumstances, the result was the same. Vlad the Impaler, the son of the dragon, was slain. His head was cut off and sent to Sultan Mehmed II in Constantinople, where it was displayed on a stake as proof that the great enemy of the empire was finally dead. His body was supposedly buried at a monastery in Snagov, on an island in a lake near Bucharest, which he had helped to found. Yet, when archaeologists excavated the site centuries later, the tomb believed to be his was found to be empty. This final mystery only adds to his legend. Though his life ended in battle, his legacy was just beginning. In his own time, he was seen by his people as a harsh but just ruler who brought order and defended their land from a mighty empire. In Turkey, he was a monstrous tyrant. In Germany and Russia, printing presses spread gruesome tales of his cruelty, creating the image of a bloodthirsty monster. This dark reputation, combined with his name, Dracula, would later inspire Bram Stoker's famous vampire novel, ensuring that Vlad the Impaler, in a way, would achieve a form of immortality he never could have imagined.